I still remember the night my wife, Emily, walked through the front door with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. Before I could even ask, she blurted out the news. She'd finally been transferred to a new department at work. According to her, this was exactly the break she'd been waiting for. Better pay, a more dynamic team, and, most importantly, colleagues who weren't, in her words, as dull as a butter knife. She was practically glowing with excitement, so I gave her a nod and a simple congratulations. It wasn't every day she came home in such high spirits, so I figured this had to be a big deal. As she talked, she went on about how her new group of co-workers had already come up with a plan to bond. Apparently, they were renting a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway, just to get to know each other better. I'll admit, it sounded a little excessive for a work outing. Seems like a lot of effort just to break the ice, I said, keeping my tone casual. Emily just waved off my skepticism. They're all about creating meaningful connections, she explained. You know, team-building stuff. I didn't really know. But I let it go. Out of curiosity, I asked her when this grand event was happening. She said they hadn't locked down all the details yet, but planned to meet up that Friday after work to go over everything. Then she dropped something unexpected. They'd be hosting the planning session at our house. That caught my attention. I wasn't against having people over, but I figured by now they'd already have things ironed out. I thought you said they were well organized? I asked. She laughed. Not everything comes together overnight, she replied. This is just step one. Something about the way she said it made me pause. But before I could dwell on it, she hit me with what I could only describe as a soft warning. You know how you can be traditional, she started, hesitating slightly. I raised an eyebrow but stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. Well, my new colleagues are really progressive. They're young, full of ideas, and they think they're going to change the world. Just do me a favor and keep the jokes to a minimum, okay? Actually, scratch that. Just smile and nod. No sarcasm, no teasing, just let them talk. Can you do that for me? I studied her for a second, wondering what exactly she thought I was going to do. And what do I get out of this? I asked, half joking. Without missing a beat, she grinned. How about I don't hit you over the head with a frying pan? She laughed at her own joke, clearly amused. I smirked but didn't press the issue further. Fine, I said. But if they cross a line, don't expect me to just sit there quietly. She nodded, satisfied with my answer. That night, we spent a while going over logistics. She listed all the snacks she'd need, what furniture needed rearranging, and how we'd set up the living room for the group. I mostly just listened, throwing in a comment here and there, but letting her run the show. She had everything under control, and I wasn't about to kill her enthusiasm with my indifference. By the end of our talk, we were on the same page. Friday night would mark the beginning of this new chapter for her, and our home would serve as ground zero for their planning. By Friday evening, I had the house looking spotless. Every room had been dusted, the carpets vacuumed, even the windows wiped down for good measure. I'd also plugged in a few air fresheners to make sure everything smelled decent. I wasn't exactly thrilled about hosting a group of strangers, but Emily wanted everything to be perfect, so I figured I might as well put in the effort. Once everything was set, I sat down with a beer, thinking back to our conversation earlier in the week. It wasn't like her to warn me about how to behave around people, especially with such a specific request. It made me wonder, had something already happened with these co-workers that made her feel the need to give me that heads up? I didn't have to wonder for long. When her colleagues arrived, they didn't bother with introductions. No polite small talk, no casual, hey, nice place. They just burst in like they owned the place, chattering loudly and completely ignoring me. I had hosted plenty of get-togethers over the years, but this was a first. Emily shot me a glance and mouthed, "Just let it go." I wasn't a fan of these people so far, but I decided to play along, for now. Then, one guy, clearly the loudest of the bunch, made his entrance in a way I wouldn't forget. He looked around the living room with a smirk and, loud enough for everyone to hear, said, "Wow. I didn't know people hired help for houses this small. My dad hires staff for our summer home, but this." He let the sentence hang, shaking his head like he had just stepped into some dump. The room went quiet for a second. I could feel Emily tensing beside me. I leaned forward and locked eyes with him. "If you don't apologize right now, You'll be out of this house so fast your dad will need a mop to pick you up off the street." My tone left no room for interpretation. The rest of the group looked at him, waiting to see how he'd react. To his credit, he muttered a half-assed apology, though it was obvious he wasn't used to being called out. I leaned back, satisfied, while the tension in the room slowly dissolved. As the evening went on, the awkwardness faded into the background. They helped themselves to drinks and snacks, filling the house with noise. One woman, who seemed to be the group's unofficial leader, started going over their plans for the cabin trip. "It's gonna be a casual team-building thing," she explained. "We want it to be a fun, relaxed weekend. Spouses, partners, even close friends are welcome to join." That last part caught my attention. I had assumed this was a work thing. Why open it up to outsiders? She continued, "We've already found the perfect spot. It's this cozy little house in the middle of the woods. There's a barbecue area, plenty of space to hang out, and we'll all stay overnight. It's going to be amazing." The rest of the group seemed really into it. I had to admit, it didn't sound as bad as I had expected. But then she mentioned something else. "And we have a special activity planned for the end of the night." Her grin was mischievous, and a few chuckles rippled through the group. I wasn't laughing. "Special activity?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Care to share?" She shook her head. "Nope. It's a surprise. You'll have to wait and see." Emily shot me a quick look, silently telling me to drop it. I let out a slow breath. All right then. I didn't like surprises, especially not from people I didn't trust, but I figured I'd deal with it when the time came. The night went on, and after her colleagues finally left, I shut the door and turned around, only to find Emily standing there, arms crossed, glaring at me. "You couldn't keep quiet, could you?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea who that guy is? That's the son of some big shot with connections to my boss. Do you even understand what kind of position you just put me in?" She was pacing now, clearly trying to contain her frustration. I leaned against the door, arms crossed. "Listen," I said evenly. "I don't care whose kid he is. If he walks into my house and disrespects me, I'm not just going to sit there and take it. I'm your husband, not some pushover who lets things slide to keep the peace. If he can't act like a decent human being, that's his problem." She stopped pacing and faced me, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you? He has connections that could help or hurt me at work. You're not protecting me, you're making my life harder." I wasn't about to back down. "And what about respect for our home?" I shot back. "Am I supposed to let some entitled kid walk all over us just because he knows a few people? That's not how I operate. If he's so powerful, he should be able to handle being called out for acting like an ass." She stared at me for a moment, the tension thick between us. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh and threw her hands up. "Fine," she muttered, her tone slightly softer. "Let's just move on. We have the big weekend coming up, and I need you to be on your best behavior. Can you do that for me?" I nodded, though I wasn't entirely convinced this conversation was over. The next few days were busy, and I started noticing a shift in Emily's behavior. She was more distracted than usual, always glued to her phone. She spent hours typing away with an intensity one hadn't seen before. One evening, I finally asked, "Who are you texting so much?" She glanced up, hesitating just a second too long before answering. "It's that guy from the party. The one you had an issue with." I frowned. "Why are you talking to him?" "Relax," she said quickly. "One of my coworkers is out sick, so I was asked to coordinate a few things with him for the corporate event. That's all." Her explanation sounded simple enough, but something about it didn't sit right with me. "All right," I said slowly, keeping my tone measured. "But let me make one thing clear. If I catch him stepping over any lines with you, I'll handle it my way. I don't care whose son he is or how much money he throws around." She rolled her eyes but nodded. "You're overreacting. There's nothing to worry about." Her words were reassuring, but I made a mental note to stay on high alert. The weekend trip was coming up fast, and Emily was preparing for it with an almost obsessive focus. Clothes, accessories, makeup, she spent what felt like hours picking the right outfits. Meanwhile, I kept things simple: a sharp shirt, a good pair of jeans, and a splash of cologne. That was all a man needed. The drive to the event was uneventful, until we hit the highway. That's when I saw him. The same rich kid from the party, driving a flashy car that practically screamed, "Daddy bought me this." At the next red light, he rolled down his window and gave us a cocky nod before flooring the gas, weaving between cars like he owned the road. "He's gonna kill someone one day," I muttered. Emily just shrugged. "That's just how he is." As if that made it okay. When we finally arrived, the place was already buzzing. The cabin was tucked deep in the woods, with a big barbecue area and plenty of open space. I had expected the worst, but for the most part, things seemed normal. For now. But that wouldn't last. Not with this group. The evening started off more or less as I expected. People were drinking, laughing, and chatting about things I had zero interest in. To avoid pointless small talk, I took over one of the grills, figuring I'd at least keep myself occupied. Cooking was something I could handle, better than standing around pretending to be entertained by these people. By the time I was done, my steak and burgers had won over most of the crowd. Even the ones who had walked in acting like they were too good for anything homemade were raving about it. "Looks like you found your true calling," one guy joked. I just smirked. Compliments were nice, but I wasn't here to impress anyone. As the night wore on, I started noticing something odd. That rich kid, the same one who had run his mouth at our house, was hovering. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but after a while, it became clear. He was sticking close to our group, chatting with different people, but every few minutes, his eyes darted toward Emily. I wasn't the only one who caught on. "You've got a shadow," I murmured to her when we were alone for a second. She gave me a look. "It's nothing. Don't start." I let it slide for the moment, but I had no intention of ignoring it. Instead of confronting him in front of everyone, I played it cool. "I'm heading out for a smoke," I announced casually. Then, turning to him, I added, "Care to join?" He hesitated, but eventually nodded. We stepped away from the group, walking a few yards into the trees where it was quieter. I lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly before speaking. "You've been watching us all night," I said, getting straight to the point. "What's your deal?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the ground before finally answering. "Your wife." He paused. "She's beautiful. That's all." I didn't say anything, just waited. "She's wearing this necklace," he continued. "It reminds me of one my grandmother used to wear. She passed away recently, so I don't know, it just caught my attention." His voice trailed off, and for a second, he actually sounded sincere. I nodded, acknowledging his loss. "Sorry to hear that." We smoked in silence for another minute, then he turned to leave. But before he walked away, he threw in one last comment. "See you at the special event later. Maybe we'll even be on the same team." Then he was gone. Team? I thought. What kind of event needs teams? I didn't like the sound of it. But I'd soon find out. At some point in the night, the crowd was ushered into the main hall of the cabin. The energy shifted. The casual, laid-back vibe was replaced by something else, an undercurrent of anticipation. Then, one of Emily's co-workers, the same woman who had organized the trip, made her way to the center of the room. With a dramatic flair, she slipped off her heels, climbed onto a table, and grabbed a microphone. I folded my arms. "Here we go," I muttered under my breath. The room went quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice filled with excitement. "It's time to reveal the surprise we've all been waiting for." The crowd cheered. Some people laughed. I just stood there, already out of patience. She dragged it out, milking the moment, then finally dropped the bombshell. "We're having a swinger party tonight." I felt my jaw tighten. Did I hear that right? I turned to Emily, expecting to see the same disgust I was feeling, but instead, I saw something else: shock. Her eyes were wide, her posture stiff. She hadn't seen this coming either. Before I could say a word, she leaned in and whispered urgently, "Look, let's just go to one of the rooms and be by ourselves. We don't have to participate in whatever this is." Her voice was pleading, almost desperate. Like she knew I was seconds away from losing it. And then, like clockwork, the rich kid strolled over, smirk firmly in place. "What's the matter?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Not your thing. Don't tell me you're too uptight for a little fun." That was it. Without thinking, I spit right in his face. The room went dead silent. His smirk disappeared instantly, replaced by pure shock. "We're done here," I said, grabbing Emily's hand. "Let's go." She followed me, but not without resistance. The moment we stepped outside, she yanked her hand away and spun around to face me, eyes blazing. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped. "You didn't have to do that. You just embarrassed both of us in front of everyone." I exhaled sharply, trying to control my temper. "Are you seriously mad at me right now?" I asked, my voice low and even. "You think I should have just stood there and let that idiot talk to me like that? Let them all treat this like some kind of joke?" She threw her hands up. "You're overreacting. People's personal lives don't define who they are at work. You're acting like some jealous control freak." I stepped closer, lowering my voice but keeping my tone firm. "This isn't about jealousy, Emily. It's about respect. These people are not your friends. And if you think this kind of behavior is normal, then we have a much bigger problem than I thought." Her face was flushed with anger, but I could see the hesitation creeping in. "If you want to save this marriage," I continued, "you're done with them. No more events. No more contact. I'm not going to stand by and watch you surround yourself with people like that." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, she muttered, "Fine. Whatever. You win." But the bitterness in her voice told me everything I needed to know. She didn't mean it. She wasn't done with them. And this was far from over. After that night at the cabin, things between Emily and me didn't exactly go back to normal. There was a tension that hadn't been there before, a silent weight pressing down on our marriage. At first, I chalked it up to the fallout from the argument, but as the days passed, I started noticing patterns I couldn't ignore. She became distant. Our usual conversations turned into vague, one-word exchanges. Normally, she'd come home from work and unload about her day, gossiping about coworkers and venting about annoying clients. But now, she barely said anything. When I asked about work, she'd brush it off with a simple, "Nothing much happened." Then there were the late nights. At first, it was just an extra hour or two here and there, something about staying late to finish reports or helping a colleague with a last-minute deadline. I let it slide. But when those late nights turned into a regular thing, my gut told me something wasn't right. One evening, when she walked in at nearly midnight, I decided I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. "You've been acting weird ever since that party. And now these late nights. If there's something you need to tell me, just say it." She sighed, clearly annoyed. "I'm not talking to them anymore," she shot back defensively. "Isn't that what you wanted? Work is just work." I didn't believe her. "Then why the late nights?" I pressed. She hesitated. Just for a second. But long enough for me to catch it. Then she let out a dramatic sigh and said, "My mom's been sick. I've been going over to help her with things around the house. Cooking, cleaning. You know how she is." That was the first real excuse she'd given me. And, on the surface, it made sense. Her mom was getting older, and she'd always been diligent about looking after her. For a moment, I felt guilty for even questioning her. "All right," I said, my tone softening. "But why didn't you just tell me that from the start?" She shrugged. "I didn't think it was a big deal. Besides, I knew you'd assume the worst." That comment stung. I let it go. But deep down, something still felt off. It wasn't just the late nights. It was her phone. She was always on it. Always texting. Always scrolling. And every time I happened to glance her way, she'd angle the screen away or lock it. "Who are you talking to so much?" I asked one evening. She barely looked up. "Just work stuff." "You're overthinking again." Maybe I was. Or maybe I wasn't. I started paying closer attention. Watching for little things. The phone usage. The vague answers. The distant attitude. The tiny moments of hesitation when I asked her direct questions. And then, there was the thought I couldn't shake. The rich kid. That smug, entitled brat who had been glued to her side that night at the cabin. Had he found a way back in? The only way to know for sure was to stop waiting for answers and start looking for them myself. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, I sat in bed, staring at the soft glow of her phone on the nightstand. I knew what I was about to do was a violation of privacy. I knew that if she caught me, it would turn into an argument I wasn't in the mood to have. But I also knew that something was wrong. I picked up the phone, unlocked it, and started scrolling. At first, I didn't find much. Her group chat with coworkers was mostly work-related. Plans for another corporate retreat at a new cabin, excitement over food, drinks, and activities. It all seemed innocent enough. But their enthusiasm felt weird. What was it about these trips that had them so eager? Then I checked her private messages. And that's when I saw it. A conversation with him. The rich kid. I clicked on the thread, my stomach tightening as I scrolled up. His last message was recent. "Why'd you stop coming to our gatherings? Why did you and your husband leave so abruptly that night?" My pulse quickened as I read her reply. "My husband doesn't approve of me hanging out with you all," she had written. "He's strict about these things, so I have to listen to him." Strict. Like I was some controlling parent and she was a rebellious teenager sneaking around behind my back. Then came his response. "Things can always change. We'll be here if you ever need us. You know the address." My hands clenched around the phone. He thought he had an opening. And based on Emily's lack of protest, he might have been right. I exited the messages and set the phone back on the nightstand. Sat there in the dark, my mind racing. Trust was already strained, and I knew confronting her without proof would just lead to more lies and excuses. I needed more. I needed to know. The next evening, Emily told me she'd be visiting her mom again and might be home late. Her tone was casual. Almost too casual. "Take your time," I said, acting like I didn't have a single doubt in my mind. She smiled, kissed my cheek, and left. The moment she was out the door, I grabbed my phone and did the one thing that would confirm the truth. I called her mom. "Hey, just checking in," I said. "How are you feeling?" Her voice was warm, like always. "I'm fine, thank you. Your wife is here now. She's in the bathroom, but everything's good." My grip on the phone loosened. For tonight, at least, she was telling the truth. I hung up, exhaling a slow breath. But that didn't change the bigger picture. The messages. The secret conversations. The suspicious enthusiasm over another trip. It was all connected. I wasn't done watching. And the moment she did lie, I'd be ready. It was just past midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. A man's voice, slurred and laughing hysterically, came through the line. "You need to get over here, man. You have to see what your wife is up to." I sat up instantly. "Who is this?" He laughed harder. "Trust me, dude. You'll want to be here. It's hilarious." Then he rattled off an address. My blood went cold. It was the same cabin Emily's group chat had mentioned. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. The drive was tense. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I had been waiting for proof. Now, I was about to get it. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to walk into. I pulled up to the cabin, my heart hammering in my chest. The place was out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by trees, lit only by the glow of porch lights and the occasional flicker of movement through the windows. The guy who had called me was standing outside, still laughing, swaying slightly like he had one too many drinks. "Man, you took your time," he slurred. "Hurry up, you gotta see this." I didn't waste time responding. I pushed past him and stepped inside. The second I walked through that door, my stomach twisted into a knot. There she was. My wife. Emily. In the middle of it all. 6 men surrounded her, laughing, touching, pouring drinks like she was the center of some sick little show. The entire room was a mess of chaos. People in various states of drunkenness, women clinging to men who weren't their husbands, clothes loosened, hands wandering. It was worse than I could have ever imagined. But the worst part? She wasn't resisting. She wasn't fighting it. She was laughing. Smiling. She was enjoying it. They didn't even notice me at first. too caught up in their disgusting little party. I didn't make a sound. I just pulled out my phone. And I started recording. I kept the camera steady, capturing every disgusting detail. I wanted proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof that would end this marriage in the most brutal way possible. Then, one of the guys, probably the same one who had called me, finally noticed. His smirk faltered. Hey, whoa, man. Too late. I turned, making sure Emily saw me, making sure she realized exactly what I was doing. Her expression changed instantly, from carefree amusement to sheer panic. She shot up from the couch, pushing away from the men around her. "What the hell are you doing here?" she shrieked, storming toward me. "Me?" I asked calmly. "I could ask you the same thing." "You have no right to be here," she hissed, her voice frantic. "This is my private life. You can't just show up like this." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your private life," I repeated, my voice icy. "Fine. Go ahead. Keep going. Don't let me stop you." She froze. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. She knew. She knew I had everything I needed. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't just leave. I wasn't going to let them get away with this like nothing had happened. I walked outside, my mind racing, my rage boiling over. That's when I remembered something. The bear spray in my glove compartment. It was a precaution I kept for camping trips, never thinking I'd actually need it. Until now. I grabbed the canister, shook it, and made my way around the cabin's side. There was an open window, just enough to get a clear shot inside. Perfect. Without hesitation, I aimed and unleashed hell. The reaction was immediate. Coughing, screaming, chaos erupting as the entire room was engulfed in a burning cloud of deterrent meant to stop a charging grizzly in its tracks. People scrambled over furniture, knocking into each other, clawing at their eyes, choking on the fumes. What the F? Who did that? I watched for a moment, satisfied, before walking back to my car. Sitting in the driver's seat, I stared at the cabin in my rear-view mirror. One by one, they stumbled outside, gasping for air, their perfect little night completely ruined. I smirked. Justice served. I didn't drive home right away. I needed to clear my head. But when I did, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. When I got home, I didn't wait. I gathered every last thing she owned, clothes, shoes, makeup, jewelry, and stuffed them into garbage bags. Then, I opened the window and started throwing them onto the lawn. Piece by piece, her life was dumped like the trash it was. By the time I was nearly done, I heard a car pulling up. Headlights flooded the yard. And then she stepped out. Not alone. She brought them. A couple of the same men from the cabin. They were yelling before they even got close to the door. "You're being unreasonable," one of them shouted. "She loves you. You need to work this out." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "Work this out," I repeated, stepping onto the porch. "You expect me to stay married to someone who was just at an orgy with you idiots?" One of them stepped forward, clearly emboldened by the alcohol still in his system. "If you don't," he sneered, "we'll make sure you regret it." I tilted my head. "Is that a threat?" Another one piped up. "Maybe we should just burn your house down, huh? Maybe then you'll see reason." That was all I needed to hear. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I turned, walked back into the house, and grabbed something from the cabinet. When I stepped back outside, their cocky expressions vanished. Because in my hands was a shotgun. I didn't aim at them. I didn't need to. I simply cocked it, raised it just enough for them to know I wasn't bluffing, and fired into the dirt at their feet. The boom was deafening. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. One of them actually stumbled back and fell on his ass. The others, already running. They scrambled into their car, yanking at the doors, peeling out of the driveway like their lives depended on it. I lowered the gun, watching them disappear into the night. Then, I turned to Emily. She was standing there, shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she choked out. "I made a mistake. We can fix this. Don't do this to us." I stepped closer, my voice deathly calm. "There is no us." She opened her mouth, But I wasn't interested in hearing another word. "You made your choice," I said. "Now, I'm making mine. This marriage is over." I walked inside and slammed the door shut. Behind me, she collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I didn't care. She had destroyed everything we built. And there was no coming back from this. The next morning, I wasted no time. Before Emily could try to weasel her way back into my life with apologies or excuses, I contacted a divorce lawyer. I laid out everything, the videos, the messages, the proof. He took one look at it and told me I had an ironclad case. "You'll walk away with everything," he said. "This isn't just cheating. This is a public scandal. A judge won't look kindly on her." And he was right. When the papers were filed, she fought it. She begged. She cried. She tried everything, from love-bombing to guilt-tripping to promising she'd change. I didn't care. She was done. And the judge? He didn't go easy on her. With video evidence of her infidelity, there was no debate. The court ruled in my favor. I got the house, the majority of our shared assets, and she was left with the bare minimum. She tried to play the victim, of course. Tried to spin the story. Tried to lie. And when that didn't work, she did something even more pathetic. She started spreading rumors. Told my family that I faked the video. Claimed I had used AI and deepfake technology to frame her for cheating. At first, some of them believed her. My sister and mother, especially, approached me with concern. "She says you manipulated the footage," my sister told me. "That you edited her face onto someone else's body." I could feel my blood pressure rising. "You've known me your whole life," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Do you really think I'd do something like that?" My mother hesitated. That hesitation stung. My father, though, he didn't hesitate at all. "She's a manipulative liar," he said bluntly. "I don't believe a damn word she says." At least someone had common sense. Still, I needed to shut this down. So I gathered official reports, technical verification proving that the video hadn't been tampered with. I sat my family down and showed them cold, hard facts. No AI. No fakes. Just the truth. Slowly, the tide turned. My mother apologized. My sister, though, she took a month-long break from speaking to me. I didn't force it. When she was ready, she came back, realizing she had let my ex's manipulation get into her head. "I should have trusted you from the start," she admitted. "It took time, but eventually, my family was back on my side. And Emily, her credibility was ruined. She had spent so much time playing the victim that, when her lies fell apart, people distanced themselves from her. But I wasn't done yet. Because I had one last card to play. See, the video I had. It wasn't just Emily's downfall. It also showed her boss's wife. I hadn't thought much of it at first, but then it hit me. This wasn't just about Emily. This was about a whole web of people engaged in disgusting, career-ending behavior. And I was about to blow it all up. I drafted an email, attached the uncut footage, and sent it directly to her boss. No warning. No explanation. Just the truth. It didn't take long to get a response. The next morning, he called me. His voice, a mix of rage and disbelief. "I had no idea," he admitted, voice shaking. "This is unacceptable. I'll be taking immediate action." And he did. Within a week, nearly everyone in that video was fired. Emily included. Her entire corporate ladder? Gone. The company cut out the rot and replaced them with new hires, leaving her jobless and humiliated. It was a clean wipe. Her reputation? Destroyed. And just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, her personal life took another nosedive. After the divorce, I moved on. I got my own place, a sleek, modern apartment with zero reminders of her. I focused on my work, my health, my peace. And Emily, she tried to run back to the rich kid. The same guy she thought was so charming. The same guy who encouraged her to betray me. But life has a way of dealing the perfect hand. Because he cheated on her. Not even a month after they started seeing each other again, he was already messing around with someone else. And the best part? He didn't even bother lying about it. When she confronted him, he just laughed. You didn't actually think I was gonna be loyal, did you? That broke her. She lost everything. Her job. Her friends. Her dignity. With nowhere else to go, she ran back to her mother's house. And that's where she stayed. Alone. Pathetic. A woman who traded in a good man for a cheap thrill, only to end up with nothing. I haven't heard from her in months. And honestly, I don't care. I've moved on. I've built a better life for myself. No drama. No lies. No games. Meanwhile, she's stuck in the mess she created. And honestly, that's exactly where she deserves to be. Because in the end, karma always wins. And some betrayals can never be forgiven. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.